Gay rights are human rights, and human rights are gay rights.
I believe that gay couples deserve the same legal rights as every other couple in this country.
Although a revolution in equal civil rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered citizens in America has yet to occur, the result of events that took place in the late 1960s, known as the gay rights movement, is continuing to make progress today. The Stonewall Riots of 1969 revolutionized the gay rights movement, which opened the doors to reforms in American civil rights. In the 1920s, most gays in the United States lived their lives closeted. However, many began to move into bohemian neighborhoods which accepted unconventional lifestyles and ideas such as their own. But by the 1950s, homosexuality was still far from being accepted in American society.
Americans consider homosexuality more harmful to society than adultery, abortion, or prostitution. Most Americans are repelled by the mere notion of homosexuality.
In Pennsylvania and California, individuals could be put away into mental institutions or prison for life and castrated in 7 states for suspected homosexuality. Gay men were also targeted as the prime suspects in most child molestation cases.
Kid yourselves about it. They can be anywhere. They can be judges, lawyers. We ought to know we've arrested all of them.
In April of 1953, President Eisenhower signed Executive Order 10450, which added sexual perversion as grounds for government investigation and dismissal. As a result of this order, more than 640 people lost their jobs that year, solely because of their sexual orientation. It was becoming evident that action needed to be taken to achieve equal rights for homosexuals. The first sustainable political movement for gay rights was the Mattachine Society, formed in 1950 in Los Angeles by Harry Hay. The purpose of this movement was to repeal sodomy laws and to create a greater tolerance for homosexuals. Although not as publicized or supported as other movements of the time, such as the civil rights movement and women's movement, gays were beginning to take a stand for their rights. This homophile movement began with low-key literary appeals in gay magazines and discussion groups sponsored by Mattachine. A lesbian group, the Daughters of Bilitis, was born later in 1955 and also started their own magazine called The Ladder. The first picketing for gay rights was started by Frank Hamney and Barbara Giddings in 1965 and took place in front of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. This picketing was very conservative. Protesters followed a strict dress code and abstained from any chanting or yelling. They were held annually every July 4th from 1965 to 1969. The Stonewall Inn, located on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village, was one of New York's largest and most popular gay clubs. It was owned by the mafia, and although notorious for being a dirty space with watered-down drinks, it was one of the main destinations for homosexuals to drink, dance, and socialize. Bar raids were common in the 1950s and 60s. Officials often targeted the minority bars, especially those that catered to the gay community. It was about 3 a.m. on Saturday, June 28, 1969, when Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine, 4 plainclothes officers, 2 patrolmen, and Detective Charles Smith approached the Stonewall Inn.
First police officer that came in with our group said, "The place is under arrest. When you exit, have some identification."
Patrons were let out one by one after about 15 minutes of ID checks. They started to assemble and wait outside with the onlooking crowd. A paddy wagon soon arrived, and a bartender, doorman, and 3 drag queens who were being held in a back room were escorted out to the vehicle. Although many accounts credit a struggling lesbian being dragged out of the bar as the source of the crowd's outrage, others say that it was a resistant transvestite being clubbed by an officer. Riot veteran and gay rights activist Craig Rodwell states, "A number of incidents were happening simultaneously. There was no one thing or one person." The crowd began to shout at the officers, calling them pigs. Other parts of the mob chanted "Gay power" and "We will overcome." They threw coins, and part of the mob attempted to tip the paddy wagons. The crowd then started throwing bottles, stones, and trash at the officers as they closed in. Detectives quickly retreated into the Stonewall and bolted the doors, but this did not stop the masses. They struck in pride at the boarded-up windows and door. They continued to hurl trash cans, bricks, pieces of glass, and anything else they could get their hands on. The crowd grew continuously, reaching almost 400 people. The melee lasted for 45 minutes until reinforcements came in to help clear out the streets. Despite the vandalism and damage from rioters as well as enraged policemen, the Stonewall was opened the next night with boards back on its windows, but the riots continued over the next few days until coming to a close after Wednesday night, July 3rd. The media and gay community buzzed in the days following the riots. It was the first time that homosexuals took to the streets to protest, and not only did it claim attention, it spread an inspirational spirit that gave new life to the homophile movement.
What happened is Stonewall came around and it gave us that spark, that impetus to be who we were and to make the changes.
The riots galvanized many people to come out and become activists. New organizations like the Gay Liberation Front and Gay Activist Alliance began to assemble immediately after the rebellion.
The Gay Liberation Front and then the Gay Activist Alliance were modeled on a New Left model, and that's what transformed the small homophile movement into a mass political movement, putting the movement for gay civil rights on the political map of America forever.
A year after the riots in 1970, the annual July 4th protest held in Philadelphia was moved to the 28th of June in New York City to commemorate Stonewall and was dubbed Christopher Street Liberation Day. Unlike the earlier July 4th protests, thousands of people from different organizations came out to proudly march and chant. This event became the first gay pride parade, which are now held annually not only in America but also in other countries as well. Later in 1973, the men of the Gay Liberation Front were instrumental as participants in the studies of Dr. Evelyn Hooker, who was able to prove that homosexuality is not a mental illness. The movement continued to grow in numbers when openly gay Harvey Milk was elected San Francisco city supervisor in 1977. Millions of gays and lesbians became aware that there were other people like them and that a reformed movement was in progress. Since the Gay Liberation Front and Gay Activist Alliance formed in 1969, the gay rights movement has continued to grow. Today there are thousands of organizations and campaigns across America. Although many students in schools were once taught to fear homosexuals, there are now over 4,000 Gay Straight Alliance student organizations. The gay rights movement continues to grow but is far from over. Today, the gay community still faces discrimination not only in the face of marriage, but also housing, employment, education, adoption, and even blood, semen, and bone marrow donation. But in the words of Harvey Milk, you gotta give him hope. That's just what the eventful summer nights of June 1969 did. The Stonewall riots brought hope, empowerment, and inspiration that reformed the quiet homophile movement of the 1950s into today's radical gay rights movement and made reforms in American civil rights possible.
We became a people. We didn't necessarily know where we were going yet. You know, what organizations were going to be or how things would go. But we became something I, as a person, could all of a sudden grab onto. You know, all of a sudden I had brothers and sisters, which I didn't have before.
Somewhere in Des Moines or San Antonio, there's a young gay person who all of a sudden realizes that she or he is gay, knows that if the parents find out, they'll be tossed out of the house. The classmates would taunt the child. And the Anita Bryans and John Briggs are doing their bit on TV. And that child had several options. Staying in a closet, suicide. And then one day that child might open up a paper and it says, homosexual elected in San Francisco. And there are two new options. The option is to go to California and fight. 2 days after I was elected, I got a phone call. And the voice was quite young. It was from Altoona, Pennsylvania. And the person said, thanks. And you've got to elect gay people so that that young child and the thousands upon thousands like that child know that there's hope for a better world. There's hope for a better tomorrow. Without hope, not only gays, but those blacks and the Asians, the disabled, the seniors, the us's. The us's. Without hope, the us's give up. I know that you cannot live on hope alone, but without it, life is not worth living. And you've got to give them hope. Thank you very much.